The night air above Winterfell smelled of iron, pine pitch, and the faintest hint of distant wood smoke. The fragrances of resilience, as old as the ramparts themselves. From the battlements, Arya Stark watched the torches shimmer on the snow-heavy courtyard below, each flame bending in the early spring wind as though bowing to winter's quiet departure. She kept her cloak wrapped high about her neck, but the cold hardly mattered. What mattered was the soundless rhythm of her own heart, the thrum of possibility none of her forebears had imagined for her. Behind her, the ancient stones retained day heat like a pulse. One palm pressed upon the rough gray surface, she let the warmth seep into her skin and thought of the first Baratheon who had stood in a strange keep and sworn fealty to a Stark king. Though centuries lay between those ancestors and this hour, the same spark writhed now, as though some phoenix older than dragons had unfurled its wings again. Arya turned from the drop toward the interior stairwell, boots scuffing the hoarfrost. Each step rang soft but certain down the narrow turret. Below, Gendry Baratheon, son of a king and bastard, no longer waited by a brazier whose oak coals glowed nearly white at the core. He smiled when he spotted her descending. Soot freckles along his jaw, dusted in ember-pink light. One gloved hand rested on the haft of a spear. Not a princeling's ornament, but a weapon shaped in his own forge. Its ashwood shimmered with linseed oil, its cruel point quenched in winter water. She loved that about him. There was no boundary between the lord he must become and the smith he had always been. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." Arya brushed past, close enough for her shoulder to graze his breastplate of mottled steel. In truth, she simply wanted to feel the calm weight of him. Beneath the metal, his breathing slowed, synchronizing to hers. They moved together instinctively now, an echo of weeks spent crossing half the north, through last harvest's charred remains, over umber lands where only newly planted willow saplings marked the graves of the whites. There had been long nights in collapsing crofters' cottages, when the only fire was a pocket of coals under a clay bell and each kept watch while the other slept. There had been mornings where they sharpened blades and plotted supply routes, speaking rarely, yet understanding everything. That shared quiet had forged them harder than Valyrian steel. In the great hall, they found Sansa conferring with Maester Wolkan beneath a tapestry of the lone direwolf. Sansa's copper hair was unbound. Strands clung to her temples in damp curls, making her look younger, though the lines of duty ran deep at the corners of her eyes. Scrolls lay scattered across the carved oaken table. Inventories from White Harbor, petitions from Bear Island, a map inked by Davos Seaworth that traced the ragged coastline from Maidenpool to Blackwater Bay. Sunburst candles dripped into silver saucers, molten beads poised as if reluctant to fall. Sansa raised her head. "You're both awake because there's work," Arya answered. "There's always work." The maester's quill paused. "Lady Sansa, if I may—" "You may not," she interrupted gently, with a smile that felt frayed yet sincere. "Not yet. Leave us a moment, Maester." Wolkan bowed and withdrew, boots scratching the flagged floor. Doors closing behind him with a groan so heavy, Arya imagined the hinges decades ago, newborn in the fires of a foundry far to the south. Sansa studied her sister and the tall black-haired man beside her. "Shall I guess? You propose another patrol of the King's Road despite the melt, making travel a nightmare. Or perhaps you plan to ride for Deepwood Motte with nothing but dispatches and hope." "I propose neither," Arya said, lifting a brow that reminded Gendry of the first time he'd seen her among Beric's ragged brotherhood, eyes daring him to doubt her. "I propose we speak plainly about banners, ours, his, and what they might become together." At that, Sansa's gaze flicked to Gendry. She had not yet grown accustomed to addressing the blacksmith who had once worn flea-bottom grime like armor. Yet she respected him, and that respect rested on the anvil of deeds, not titles. He had fought at Winterfell's defense, hammering dragonglass arrowheads through the night, taking up axe and shield when whites breached the eastern wall, dragging wounded Northmen to safety until his arms bled. He had stood shoulder to shoulder with Jon Snow during the march south to King's Landing, and when Daenerys' ashes settled over the cracked tiles of the Red Keep, he alone had spurned the scramble for crowns. He had ridden home with Arya, his heart a silent question. Now that question demanded language. Banners, Sansa said at last. Many will balk at the notion of a crowned stag sharing field with a direwolf. We won't ask, Arya replied. We'll show them. Gendry drew a folded square from his doublet and unfurled it. Wolf and stag interwoven. Sable direwolf, rampant, with emerald eyes. Silver antlers braided through its fur like living branches. Beneath, rippled a river of blue. A tribute to the forge water where the emblem's prototype had been quenched. It was art that still smelled faintly of black dye and smoke. Sansa reached to touch the fabric's edge. Beautiful work, she murmured. But beauty rarely persuades lords entrenched in old feuds. Then we'll persuade them another way, Gendry said, voice low as thunder beyond hills. With roads rebuilt, with taxes eased, with grain shipped before hunger can settle. We'll promise no gold we can't mint, no justice we can't mete. And if promise is not enough, then we'll bleed beside them until it is. Arya's certainty cut through swirling candle fumes, leaving silence sharp as a drawn knife. Sansa exhaled. You intend a tour. The Barrowlands, Torhin's Square, Glover men, Manderley fleets. All of them, Arya said, stepping nearer the map. But smaller holdfasts too. Molestown heals from fires still smoldering in their root cellars. Coldstream lost 2 fishing fleets to sudden storms. Messages from the Citadel hint darker portents. We must listen where thrones have been deaf. The Iron Throne is cinders, Sansa reminded her. There will be a great council soon. Gendry, you'll have a seat whether you desire it or not. My seat is here, he said. My voice will carry further if I ride with proof of what our houses can accomplish together. He glanced at Arya, and the word "our" left a warmth in her chest. Sansa traced a fingertip along the King's Road drawn in sepia ink. Arya, you once vowed never to wear another's collar. And I am not, Arya said. We ride equal, wolf and stag, neither shackled. A log collapsed in the hearth, sending sparks wheeling. For an instant, the hall glowed bright enough to banish every shadow. Then darkness returned softer, like a blanket settling. Sansa folded the banner into a neat square and handed it to Gendry. Then ride, she said. Ride carefully. Each promise you make will bind you twice. Once to the folk you serve and once to each other. Be certain before your oaths are spoken. Arya could have replied with a wolfish grin or a sly retort, but seriousness anchored her tongue. She nodded, accepting the weight of the truth her sister had placed upon them. Gendry bowed, a gesture that felt less a lordly courtesy than a craftsman's respect. They departed through corridors where armored sentries dipped helms. Outside, dawn was a faint bronzing of cloud edges. Stable hands had readied 2 coursers. Gendry's deep bay twisted its ears at icy wind. Arya's gray mare stamped soft drifts into powder. Saddle bundles bulged with parchment rolls, flasks of spice wine, tins of Maester Wolkin's wound salve, and little pouches of coin minted with Sansa's visage. Winterfell's armory had contributed more. Short swords of castle-forged steel, a crossbow newly strung, 50 quarrels tipped in black iron. Gendry tied the new banner to his spear shaft. The wolf and stag emblem fluttered, heavy silk resisting the breeze. He swung astride, leather stirrup creaking. Arya mounted with cat-like grace and rode close enough that their knees touched. At the gate, a motley escort assembled. Sir Robin Ryswell, gaunt and unsmiling. 2 young Karstark cousins brandishing polearms taller than themselves. An older wildling woman everyone called Skjorn, who spoke rarely but whose obsidian hatchet had felled more wights than some northern houses mustered men. No trumpets announced departure, only the squeal of chains as the portcullis rose. They crossed beneath the arch where direwolves were sculpted in weather-softened relief. And the last thing Arya felt of Winterfell was a breath of warm air drawn out after them, as though the castle exhaled prayer. They rode south at a steady trot, but turned west before the last river, making for villages too small for any map Sansa owned. Arya insisted on the detour. If we don't begin with the forgotten, we'll end up forgetting them, she told Gendry. He'd nodded, though he understood only in part. Over the next days, understanding grew, watered by muddy roads, by children gaping at the bastard made lord and the girl made more than lady, by elders who pressed charred plows into their hands, asking mending, not alms. Gendry repaired chains for a grain mill outside Widow's Watch, while Arya drilled farmers in spear-thrust footwork, her quick corrections edged with humor that coaxed stiffness from calloused hands. At dusk, she walked the levee's length, praising a crooked stance here, adjusting an elbow there, until tired men straightened with pride. Nearby, Gendry hammered out a broken latch beneath a makeshift awning, sparks cascading against rainfall like stars falling sideways. When his anvil rang, Arya's lips curled, recognizing the rhythm of hope. Each village left them heavier with news. A missing calf? A marriage feud? Whispered rumors of sellswords along the Dreadfort Road. Arya recorded every name and claim in a slim ledger bound with wolfhide. Gendry studied her script at night, remarking that her loops looked like sword strokes. She teased that his own penmanship resembled axe wounds. Their laughter bounced inside canvas as wind rattled the tent ropes. On the 11th day, Skjorn approached their campfire, tilting her head as though listening to ghosts. "Riders behind," she rasped. "Not ours." Moments later, hooves drummed low over the ridge. Moonlight broke upon helms embossed with the mailed fist of House Glover. Ser Robin signaled a halt with a white cloth, but the newcomers did not charge. Their captain dismounted, helm tucked in crook of arm. Harsh lines bracketed his mouth, yet his bow was courteous. "Lord Baratheon, Lady Arya," he said. "I am Sir Hendren Glover. I ride on behalf of Lady Robert's widow, my mother. We heard rumor of your passing and thought best to confirm." "Nanand," Pit Sanishore. "To confirm what?" Gendry asked. "Your intent." Arya stepped forward. "Our intent is plain. To mend what war and winter broke." "A generous purpose," Sir Hendren admitted. "But generosity breeds suspicion in lean times. Many wonder what coin will pay for these repairs later, whether the coin will be blood or gold." Gendry gestured to the camp. 3 tents, modest blaze, tools of smith and soldier laid out openly. "We ask no more than what folk can spare. A place to sleep, a bowl of stew. The rest comes from our own hands." "Hands tire," the knight warned. "Roads lengthen. Sooner or later you will require tithe. Will Glover men be asked to kneel to a banner not their own?" Around them their escort bristled, but Arya's voice stayed calm. "The North already kneels to no southern crown. We did not return to chain them again. We return to weave new bonds, ones that hold because they are chosen, not forced." Hendren held her gaze. Snowflakes drifted between them, seeming to pause before landing. When he spoke, it was softer. "My mother would meet you at Deepwood Motte if invitation were offered." "It shall be," Arya said, and Gendry inclined his head. The Glovers rode off into darkness. Arya slanted a look at Gendry. "First test passed?" "One of many." He exhaled, breath pluming like forge smoke. "But if every trial is met with honest words, we might yet succeed." Honest words and honest steel. She tapped the dagger at her hip. Now steel, no living faces to gift it power, but still true. That night, as Gendry banked the fire, Arya reclined on her bedroll and traced constellations beyond tent flap. The sky had cleared. Stars glinted as sword points coldly waiting. She pictured each as a possible path. One leading through wary northern lords, one south to the Vale where sweet-voiced letters already probed for alliances. One east, across narrow sea, where trouble always brewed in some free city's veins. Any could demand them. None would break them. Gendry lay beside her, torso rising and falling beneath a patchwork quilt had bartered off a grateful widow. He whispered, "What troubles your eyes, wolf?" She smiled, only thinking how far light travels. How old those stars are. Older than Egan, older than the wall. Yet here they are, same as ever, watching us try again, and they'll watch long after us. He shifted closer, forehead brushing hers. "So all we can do is forge what lasts beyond our bones." "Yes." She found his hand and squeezed. "Let's begin with that." They reached Deepwood Motte after 3 more dawns, entering beneath pine boughs strung with icicles. Lady Serena Glover greeted them in a courtyard scented with cedar resin. She wore widow's gray trimmed with forest green, her hair pinned in a net of bronze. Her eyes lingered on the banner that flared behind Arya's mount. She did not smile, but neither did she frown. In the guest hall, as rain pecked at shutters, Gendry displayed his spear emblem and spoke of roads needing cobble, of sawmills requiring water wheels, of children lacking scribes to teach them letters and healers to dress their burns. Arya paced slowly behind him, interjecting with stories gathered on their travel. Mistwood orphans raising wolf pups to guard their fields, fishermen of Coldstream carving new masts from storm-felled spruce. "And what do you seek in return?" Lady Serena finally asked, voice like a whetstone striking flint. "Support," Arya said. "When we convene our Council of Lords, North and Stormlands both, we'll need the trust of houses who know suffering and strive to end it. Stand with us. Bring your longships. Bring your timber. Bring your scars, because they matter." Silence spread like oil on water. Then Lady Serena rose. "House Glover will consider. Tonight you dine as honored guests. Tomorrow we ride to inspect the mill where so many men broke fingers and spirits. If repairs you promise prove, that will speak louder than heraldry." Arya inclined her head, absorbing the unspoken challenge. Gendry's lips crooked, half smile, half oath. The next morning found them ankle-deep in sawdust on a riverbank where great logs lolloped by, snagging on shattered gears. Gendry shed cloak and rolled sleeves, muscles roped beneath skin scored by forge accidents. With Sir Robin, he levered aside broken cogs. Arya, boots submerged, coached villagers to lash timbers into makeshift cranes. Spring sun emerged, warm enough to melt icicles hanging from wheel spokes. By dusk the water wheel turned again, sluggish at first, then surging as paddles bit the current. Villagers cheered, saws yelped into fresh cedar, and the river smelled of sap. Lady Serena, arms crossed, watched from a footbridge. When Arya approached, soaked to the knees, the widow's gaze softened by a fraction. "Promise kept," Serena conceded. "It's only begun," Arya replied. So it went. Inspection after inspection, wheel after wheel. When they departed, a dozen Glover households pledged timber levies for roadworks come thaw. "Date?" Lady Serena pressed into Arya's palm a medallion, a tree anchoring a fist. "To remind you of what roots can hold," she said. Arya wore it on a rawhide cord beside the coin Gendry had once flicked her for courage. Their retinue pushed east through flint hills where ravens wheeled over lands still blackened from dragonfire years old. But not forgotten. Rumors reached them of a sellsword company massing near Barrow Hall claiming descent from the Second Sons, though most had never crossed the narrow sea. Arya ordered scouts. Gendry drafted letters, one to Wyman, Manderley requesting grain convoys for Flintstead refugees, one to Tarth where Brienne might counsel on dealing with mercenaries grown too bold. Nights lengthened, not with darkness but with conversation, of governance, of justice, of how one balances mercy against law. Arya spoke of faceless teachings, of seeing beyond masks yet respecting every mask's story. Gendry countered with a smith's pragmatism. A blade too soft cannot hold an edge, a blade too hard shatters. They fell asleep arguing, smiling even as they slept. At Baratheon they met Lady Barbary Dustin, her hair silver-shot and eyes sharp as the knives rumored at her belt. She welcomed them into halls where horse skulls grinned above lintels. "Your father would blanch at a stag in his daughter's bed," she said to Arya, though amusement rang under the barb. Arya retorted in kind, and soon they lounged before a hearth sharing mead. Lady Dustin produced a chest of ancient Stark relics, crested helms, chipped longswords, arrowheads corroded green, and offered one gift. A pommel carved like a snarling direwolf, ivory aged to honey. "For your dynasty's first sword," she said, and even Gendry's stoicism cracked. They lodged 3 nights, long enough for Arya to note Baratheon's depleted stables, its grooms wounded by raiders months prior. Gendry oversaw shoeing of near 30 destriers, instructing apprentices with patience Tyrion Lannister, might once have doubted possible in a blacksmith's bastard. When they departed, Lady Dustin rode with them part way, banner flying dark crimson. "I am too old to rebuild kingdoms," she said, "but I can open gates and close them behind foes. Send word, I'll bar passage." Through moor and fen they continued, each village imprinting some truth on them. That despair lingered yet, that hope dawned swift where hunger eased, that stories mattered. Of wolves and stags, of queens who turned to ash, of bastards who became something else. Children chased the banner, shouting, "Lord Gendry," until their throats cracked. Women placed pale blue winter roses in Arya's stirrup leathers. She passed them later to lonely gravesites they found, honoring nameless dead. Word traveled faster than hooves. By the time they reached Torrhen's Square, Lord Torrhen Tallheart greeted them with a feast, hall decked in evergreen boughs. Minstrels already singing tale of the forged wool. Gendry's cheeks flushed whenever the chorus rhymed. Hammer with clamor. Arya squeezed his hand beneath the trestle, hiding laughter behind a tankard. She did not drink overmuch. Instinct kept her sharp, but her spirit soared. During the feasts, Lord Torrhen asked, "And children? A dynasty must have heirs." His tone was gentle, yet the hall hushed, awaiting answer. Arya felt heat climb her neck. She had slain Night King's generals and sailed beyond maps. But the thought of babes cooing in a nursery unsettled more than any blade. Gendry placed his calloused hand over hers on the table. "We'll trust the gods' timing," he said. "First we build a realm worthy of them." Torrhen nodded. Conversation resumed. Yet Arya found her mind drifting to a small forge yard bathed in spring light, where a toddler swung a wooden hammer at sparking iron while a direwolf pup dozed at his feet. She shook herself free. Dreams could wait. South of the Barrowlands, the King's Road lay rutted by early caravan traffic. They camped near a ruined holdfast, rumored haunted by wraiths. Gjorn set talismans of bone. Karstark lads boasted they feared no ghost. At night, a wind moaned through arrow slits, but no spirit emerged. Only memories. Arya dreamed of Nymeria howling across green waters. Gendry dreamed of hot pie cooling on a flea-bottomed sill. They woke sealing each other from phantoms. Late in the second month, snow melt flooded lowlands near the neck, turning tracks to sucking bog. Progress crawled. Supplies ran thin. But as they waited, soggy to hip, they encountered Crannog men who offered reed-woven rafts. The Crannog chief, a sinewy youth named Ben of Greywater, recognized Arya's sigil. "Your brother once saved our lord's life," he said. "A debt carried on water waits long but is never forgotten." They guided the party along secret channels, where moss drooped like tattered banners and unseen things plopped into murk. One evening Ben brought smoked eel. Another, a paste of cattail root sweet as almond. Arya shared stories of the many-faced god, and of dragons that burned masters in Slaver's Bay. Gendry mended their corroded spearheads with a traveling brazier, and charcoal Ben's folk harvested from lightning-struck willows. When they departed, Crannog eyes glimmered under woven hoods, promising watch over these lands for the wolf-stag flag. Beyond the neck, the air grew warmer. Blossoms dared show pink amid frost-browned grass. Small folk tilled fields ravaged by Lannister marches seasons past. But seeds had survived beneath surface. Gendry stopped to test soil between fingers, recalling conversations with Mistress Wolken about crop rotation. He advised adding crushed charred wood and fish bones to restore strength. Farmers listened wide-eyed at a lord who spoke humbly of worms and loam. Arya helped drive an ox team where the owner's shoulders still mended. She walked barefoot behind the plow, toes caked in black dirt, face streaked with sweat. Gendry watched her, and knew in that moment that no coronet could weigh heavier than the sight of Arya Stark breaking ground for strangers. One dusk, thunderheads shoved across orange horizon. The escort hastened to a half-collapsed sept for shelter. Rain slammed the slate roof. Inside, faded frescoes peeled like scabs from plaster. There they cooked onion broth, steam curling past cracks where stained glass once glinted. Afterward, Arya wandered among toppled icons, until she found a niche depicting the smith and the warrior clasping wrists. The paint had flaked, but lines remained strong. She traced them, thinking of Gendry's hands. How they could cradle newborn steel or crush a skull in battle. She felt him step beside her, shielding a lantern flame. Together, they regarded the figures. "Seems they understood partnership," he murmured. "Us we do." She turned, eyes catching lantern gold. She brushed his cheek, thumb across soot smear. Lightning flashed beyond windowless arch, momentarily illuminating their silhouettes against rough stone. Arya felt the spark of something more binding than vows, a recognition of twin natures forging one future. They did not kiss, closeness sufficed. Rain hammered the roof like countless nails sealing their silence. Morning dawned clear. They resumed southward, skirting castle ruins where crows squabbled over carrion leftover from bandit raids. At Maidenpool, they met refugees telling tales of storms thrones, a ragtag brotherhood claiming Highgarden's empty seat and raiding supply trains. Gendry frowned. The reach must be stabilized. Grain there could feed 10 Norths. Yet stepping beyond their region risked spreading resources too thin. Arya scribbled notes, mind-balancing maps. Allies in the Riverlands, Tully remnants, Blackwood archers, might quell banditry if properly equipped. She resolved to send ravens once they reached White Harbor. But first, they must reach White Harbor. It was on the coastal cliffs of Seaguard that the journey shifted from outreach to ordeal. Scouts reported sellswards crossing the Green Fork, roughly 200 strong, armored in mismatched cuirasses, banners bearing a chained sun. An old sigil from Essos. The chains of mire. They demanded passage, claiming to serve a pretender styling himself Lord of Stormhall. Arya, studying their movements, suspected plunder rather than politics. Sir Robin, riding with scouts, proposed ambush at River Narrows. Gjorn recommended striking first, while Ben's Cranagmen, who had lingered, offered poison darts in reed canoes. Gendry listened and spoke. "We talk before we fight." He rode with a white flag to the sellsword vanguard, Arya shadowing unseen through pines. The mercenary captain, a crook-backed man called Tero, laughed at Gendry's banner. "Bastards wearing wolves now? I'll wear your pelt myself." Negotiation failed at sword point. Yet Tero had not counted on Arya slipping behind to hold her blade at his kidney, nor on Gendry's spear swinging with blacksmith force to disarm his lieutenant. An arrow from Skjorn's longbow felled another. Panic rippled. Half the sellswords bolted. The remainder surrendered. Gendry spared them on condition they lay down steel and work to repair the very towns they threatened. Tero spat until Sir Robin removed 2 of his teeth with mailed fist. Gendry bound the captain's wrists and set him to hauling lumber for Seaguard's pier. Word of the Baratheon Stark justice spread down the coast in fishing boats quicker than ravens could fly. At Seaguard's keep, Lord Patrick Mallister pledged ships for any cause Arya joined so long as his ports stayed free of reavers. She promised vigilance. He gifted her a smooth piece of sea glass shaped like a crescent moon. "Every sea leaves glass," he said, "but only patient tides reveal it." She tucked it in her belt pouch beside the Stark coin and Glover talisman. They rested 2 days, or tried. Gendry hammered bent plowshares in the castle smithy while children crowded the doorway. Arya taught them knife throwing, using sticks not blades. At supper, they compared notes, realizing they felt more rested while working than idling. Finally, after nearly 3 moons upon the road, their column wound into White Harbor. The Grand Harbor lay swollen with spring trade. Fish stink mingled with perfumed crates from Bravos. Lady Lena Manderley welcomed them in place of her father Wyman, whose gout confined him to tower chambers. She led them past marble mermaids and weeping stone warriors, toward a feast where tables groaned beneath slabs of spiced eel pie and wheels of green-veined cheese. Wyman himself emerged later on a sedan chair, borne by 4 husky sailors. "A Baratheon among us again," he boomed, voice undimmed. "Last one to sit at my table put my poor heart to strain." Gendry flushed but bowed. The merman lord chuckled. "I jest, lad. You're no usurper. You're a builder." He nodded at Lady Lena, who produced parchments sealed in blue wax, deeds granting forest tracts near the Wolfswood for Gendry's proposed sawmills. and a line of credit from the Manderley coffers to overhaul the King's Road's most treacherous causeways. Gendry accepted with humble thanks. Arya clasped Wyman's sausage-thick fingers. And in return, Lord Manderley? Only that when your dynasty sits its chosen seat, you remember the tide that carried you there. Admit a merman to your council. He winked. I'm far too old, mind you, but my granddaughter shows aptitude. A seat will be waiting, Arya promised. Later, beneath vaulted ceilings painted deep sea blue, Arya and Gendry stood alone. Moonlight diffused through water-stained glass, dousing them in wavering patterns. Arya unrolled her ledger on a long table, pages thick with alliances. Glover timber, Dustin horses, Mallister ships, Manderley loans. Gendry laid a finger on each in turn, tracing a web. See, she whispered. It's beginning. He shook his head. It began the moment we stepped through Winterfell's gate together. This, his hand swept across inked promises, is merely proof. And the next proof. We ride home, he said. We call the lords to Winterfell. We speak plain. If they accept, we'll kneel to no crown but the one we choose together. He inhaled, voice faltering. If they refuse, then we ride again. She grasped his forearm. And again, until refusal seems folly. He smiled, weary yet shining. You were always the wolf that chased the horizon, and you the stag that outran fear. She pressed her forehead to his. Together we trample the past, and seed the field for what comes. Outside gulls shrieked in pre-dawn. Wide harbor stirred, Akans loading casks, fishmongers sharpening blades. Somewhere a tower bell tolled 6 slow beats. Gendry kissed Arya's brow, gentle as first snow. They turned from the ledger, toward the doorway, shoulders brushing. 2 figures silhouetted against a mauve sky, not yet monarchs or myth, but already, undeniably, the first heartbeat of a dynasty. The ride east from White Harbor began beneath a pearl-gray sky, the air salted by the breaking waves that gnawed incessantly at the jetty pilings. Gendry and Arya jolted forward in the vanguard column, their new banner snapping overhead, while the rest of the party spread along the causeway like a wandering shoal. A fresh tide of purpose coursed through them, yet purpose alone did not hurry their pace. The horses walked, not trotted, so that every villager who waved from a field gate or fish-skin shack could approach and speak. The young lord and the wolf-born lady paused at each meeting. The ledger close at hand, the answers unhurried, the promises measured. 6 leagues passed before the shoreline bent southward, and the first stands of red birch gave way to the mossy gloom of the Wolf's Wood proper. Inside that ancient forest, the world turned dim and wet, an echo chamber of dripping branches and muffled hoofbeats. Arya felt the trees notice them the way a crowd attends a storyteller. She remembered childhood tales of the old gods walking in such groves when humans were still half a whisper in the cold. She told none of these thoughts aloud. Instead, she studied the column, counting heads, noting the fresh slit in Sir Robin Riswell's cloak, the way the Karstark boys drifted toward Skjorn to hear her yarns of northern lights glimmering over Hardhome ruin. Gendry, hammer strapped across his saddle, grazed fingertips along peelings of silver bark as they passed, as if testing its grain for some future shield. Camp, the first night glimmered in a clearing, bounded by deadfalls thick with mushrooms. Ben of Greywater, who had lingered on the journey, directed the tents to crescent around a cold spring bubbling beneath a crust of moss. As dusk seeped through the canopy, Arya crouched by the water, cupped a handful, and let it spill again, listening to how the stream burrowed under roots before surfacing yards away. Behind her, Gendry arranged the portable anvil, the glow of charcoal crackling against twilight. He shaped arrowheads for the escort, flattening and fluting them until each resembled a tapered shard of midnight. Sparks leapt upward and died among the leaves. Arya watched a while, relishing how the hiss of metal plunged into a bucket, married perfectly with the forest hush. After supper, Skjorn produced a pouch of dried cloudberries steeped in honey. She handed 2 to Arya, 2 to Gendry, and said nothing. Yet in those silent grains, there rang a benediction. The smith and the wolf bound a fallen trunk away from the others. They chewed the berries, and the sweetness lingered. Arya leaned back until her hood touched the rough bark. "We are nearly home," she murmured. "Nearly," Gendry agreed. Though I wonder if Winterfell will feel like the same fortress we left. It won't, she said, staring upward where the first star blinked between boughs. We won't be the same inside it either. He considered this, thumb brushing her leather-clad knuckles. I want to see the forges again. The old ones your father kept. Winterfell's steel is different. Cleaner in the fold, truer in the quench. I need that steel for the sword that carries Lady Dustin's pommel. She gave a soft laugh. So our dynasty's first blade begins as a wolf's head from Baratheon. Folded in Winterfell's heart, forged by a Baratheon hand. Fitting. Gendry tugged her fingers gently until her head tipped onto his shoulder. And tempered, he added, with stark fire. They sat thus until night swallowed all hints of horizon. Owls called, insects hummed, and somewhere a distant direwolf howled. Nothing like Nymeria's roar, yet the sound set Arya's pulse trotting. Voices rose from camp as watch rotations changed. She exhaled, knowing dawn would bring roads mapped but never trod and conversations scripted only by need. For the first time since leaving White Harbor, she wondered whether her ledger, now thick and ink-sticky, could truly carry the weight of so many expectations. The fear glimmered a moment, fragile as soap bubble, before Gendry's warmth dispelled it. Morning arrived cloaked in ground mist. They rode off, and the mist shredded on their stirrups. 2 leagues along, a pair of riders in gray cloaks appeared between the trunks, their horses sleek, their pace unhurried. Sir Robin's hand swerved to his sword, but Arya raised a palm. The lead rider lowered his hood to reveal a young Stark guardsman, cheeks wind-pink and earnest. Message from Lady Sansa, he announced, voice cracking slightly with the honor of it. Arya accepted the sealed tube. She cracked the wax, unrolled the parchment, and skimmed the precise strokes. A council had been convened ahead of their arrival, at Maester Wolkin's urging. Lords and ladies from as far as Long Lake and as close as the neighboring Umberlands already gathered within Winterfell's walls. Yet not all who approached came in peace. Scouts reported a Bolton loyalist remnant, skulking around the ruins of the Dreadfort, and a band of sellsword archers drifting through Queenscrown. The Ravenry was nervous. Sansa sought her sister's counsel with haste. Arya refolded the letter. We press on without delay, she said, loud enough for the column. Gendry nodded and signaled the pace change. The horses broke into an eager canter. The trees blurred by. By sunset they breached the forest's southern fringe and caught the far-off glint of Winterfell's lanterns through a veil of fine sleet. Steam rose from the hot water moats, curling over the parapets like slow ghosts. The heavy timbers of the main gate clattered open, and out strode Sansa herself, lined cloak whipping behind her, cheeks flushed by the furnace breath of the kennels. She smiled, though Arya noted tension webbed at the edges of her mouth. Before words could pass, the sisters embraced, short and tight, warriors' hugs, and then Arya stepped back, scanning the courtyard. It thrummed with life. Horses crowded the stock pens. Wagons stuffed with casks choked the alleys. Banners rippled everywhere. Risewell Argent horses, Serwyn black battle axes, Hornwood moose on brown field, even the bright green sunburst of House Manderley beside a crimson Mallister eagle. Above them all, centered upon the keep tower, the new Wolfstag sigil flapped, dye still pungent in the damp air. The sight tugged a half-smile across Gendry's face, but fatigue dimmed his eyes. 3 moons of road dust weighed on him, Arya too, though she lifted her chin and feigned lift. Sansa led them to the great hall. Fires there blazed colossal, spitting resin. Framed beneath the Lord's gallery stood a long trestle formed by 4 oak tables, joined end to end. Every inch of its surface shrouded with parchment, candlesticks, cups, and small stabbing knives used for emphasis during debate. Around it milled nobles, sworn swords, stewards, and 2 septons, in rain-spotted robes, looking as bewildered as robins caught in a rookery. Conversation cracked and billowed. As Arya and Gendry entered, talk dwindled like embers starved of air. Lord Branston Serwyn, thick-shouldered, famed for a laugh like thunder, set hands on hips and called, "So the Wanderers return." His tone teased, but his eyes appraised. "Return with news worth hearing," Arya said. planting her gloves atop a rolled map. She did not sit. Standing lent her words gravity. Timber flows from Deepwood Motte by midsummer. Mallister ships patrol the stony shore. Flintstead's river wheel grinds again, and Seaguard's pier rises stronger than before. In every place we pledged aid, we delivered. N.D. Lady Serena Glover stepped forward next, confirming the mill repairs and timber quotas in her low steel-filed voice. The assembly murmured. Lord Torrin Tallheart recounted the plough lessons, his admiration obvious. Even Lady Barbary Dustin, leaning on an ivory-tipped cane, offered dry assent. Yet amid these supportive tones, a single scoff cut across. It belonged to Sir Edmar Bolton, minor cousin to the late lord, gaunt as famine and no friend to the Starks. He wore plain mail, but the green of his eyes smoldered with old grudges. Words are cheap as crow droppings on battlefield banners, he said. You claim good deeds, but coin and manpower bleed northward for a dream stitched on silk. Will you repay our levies with songs? The jab stung several ears. Mutters erupted. Gendry answered before heat carried tongues too far. Metal repays, Sirda. Tools, nails, horseshoes, axle rings that never buckle. Food repays, grain moved where hunger prowls. And should wolves howl at your door again, this banner will answer. Then who? He touched the wolf stag cloth folded under his arm, voice even. But the muscles in his forearm flexed like bowstrings. Arya watched Bolton's lip curl. She clutched the ledger, ready for serpents. Another voice intervened, calmer. Lord Thorin Smallwood of Acorn Hall, visiting from the southern edges. Whether wolves or stags will answer, we must test. What governance follows these mended wheels and patrolled shores? Who adjudicates quarrels between a northern holdfast and a Stormlander petty lord, when both claim tides on the same stretch of the King's Road? Then Arya saw where the question bent. She turned a page of her ledger and tapped a neat chart under the title circuit courts. A council of 9, she explained, chosen by equal vote of Northern and Stormlander lords. Each justice sits 1 year in a given circuit, then rotates south or north across the neck, preventing bias from rooting. No decision stands without concurrence from at least one judge of the opposite region. Smallwood folded arms. An elegant parchment solution. Yet men wielding spears may quail at traveling leagues to contest a stolen goat. That is why we restructure the post riders. Gendry continued, producing sketches of lightweight iron hoofboots for swifter mounts. Ravens carry word ahead. Litigants know when the circuit rides near. And we train conveyors to bind simple cases on the spot, leaving the council to weightier matters. Torches spit as someone stoked logs. Sansa watched the room absorb each detail. She let silence stretch, then asked, Who objects to this outline? Several hands shifted uncertainly. None rose. Bolton's glare flicked from Arya to Gendry to Sansa, but he kept still. Maester Walken tottered forward, scroll in hand, spectacles glimmering. If I may add, grain yield projections show a 30% surplus within 3 years provided the reach stabilizes. That surplus must flow where needed. A unified Baratheon Stark authority offers the riverbed for that flow. Bolton barked a short laugh. Provided we grovel to reach lords whose fields we burned not long ago. Reach lords, Arya said, are too busy with their own ashes to demand groveling. Better we present them a trade lane than an enemy line. Murmurs of assent rose. Bolton stepped back, jaw tight. Sansa looked to the crowd. Tomorrow we hold formal debate. Tonight refresh yourselves. The library stacks are open, food unending, chambers warmed. Speak among one another. Decide whether a new banner abolishes old rifts or sharpens them. The gathering dissolved into knots. Serving boys rushed in with mulled wine, and the tension thinned like mist under sun. Arya exhaled. Gendry set a hand on the small of her back, steadying, claiming nothing. Later, in the rooms once belonging to Eddard Stark himself, Arya stripped dusty leathers and washed with water gone lukewarm. She stared at her reflection in the basin. Cheeks hollowed by miles, hair grown long enough to tie back in a warrior's tale. Her eyes, though, flashed the same gray that once peeked from beneath a baker's cart near Harrenhal, from behind a mask in Bravos, from the deck of a ship aimed at sunset. She splashed another palmful over her face. Footsteps behind heralded Gendry. She did not turn. "They test like craftsmen," she said softly. "Strike, quench, strike again. As they should. A blade breaks if not tested." She straightened, water dripping from her chin, and faced him. "Tomorrow we stand beneath the heart tree. I feel it. The old gods will listen, and so will these lords, but not if there's blood on the snow before sunrise." He frowned. "You sense blood." Bolton's eyes writhed with vengeance. "He has allies yet. Rats scurry when barns fill." She wiped her hands, knotted her hair, and buckled a long knife to her thigh. "I will patrol tonight." "We both will," he answered. They left the castle warmth, cloaks swirling. The courtyard lay glazed with sleet that caught torchlight like shards of amber. Guard rotations changed on the walls. Arya quizzed each sentry, verifying watchwords. Crossing to the smithy, they found the doors ajar, and a low glow inside. Two apprentices leaned over a forgotten anvil. Upon the floor glinted a coiled length of chain, red-hot at its core. At first Arya thought it a forge accident, until she noticed the sigil etched on the links, tiny suns bound by manacles. Chains of mare. The sellsword mark. Her heartbeat slid into a cold, quiet place. She knelt to inspect. One apprentice gulped. "A traveler paid us coin to draw that pattern. Said it was for a lord's gift," he stammered. "We thought no harm." "Where is he?" Gendry asked, voice like gravel. The boy shrugged, fearful. Arya stood. "He's inside these walls plotting." She dismissed the apprentices and doused the coals. The chain hissed, steel losing its cherry glow, turning the color of old secrets. She coiled it into a satchel and slung it over her shoulder. The search lasted hours. They moved through crypt passages where ancient kings slept beneath cobweb lintels, through dungeons where straw molded against stone, through lofts where ravens croaked dreams Sansa's scribes would read come dawn. Arya felt the castle as living flesh, arteries of corridor, bone of tower, heartbeat of furnace. Twice they glimpsed shadow movement. Twice it vanished like ink in water. Near midnight, they entered the old glass gardens. Panes fogged, vines skeletal. A stolen lantern glowed behind the door of a potting shed, set against the outer greenhouse wall. Arya motioned. Gendry shouldered his hammer. They burst in. Inside crouched a lean sellsword in patched leather armor, one eye milky, the other serpent bright. He hunched over a small cask brimming with gray powder. Dragonstone dust if Arya's nose read true, volatile as wildfire when mixed with oil. Fuses lay coiled on the soil floor, marked with Bolton green ribbons. The man whipped around, blade half drawn. Arya's throwing knife thudded into his thigh before steel cleared sheath. He shrieked, sagging into dirt. Gendry kicked the sword away and yanked the man upright. "Who paid you?" he demanded. "Gold from the Dreadfort vault," the sellsword spat. "Breath rank Dodot. Bolton coin buys long memories." Arya secured his wrists with the chain coil she'd taken. "Not long enough," she said. With stealth broken, they summoned guards, removed the powder to a stone bunker, and dragged the prisoner to a tower cell. Dawn's first violet smear tinged the east by the time they finished. Sansa met them as pale light bled across battlements. She listened grave-faced to the account, then ordered patrols doubled, and Sir Edmar Bolton confined to quarters under watch, until the council. "If this remnant tries again," she vowed, "they will meet the fate of their flayed sigil." Arya looked over the wall at forest tops icing in rose glow. "That fate comes not from us alone," she said. "Let Edmar sit in the godswood under the heart tree's eyes. Let the old gods judge his words when the time is right." Sansa nodded, trusting. They parted to prepare for the day's assembly. The great weirwood in Winterfell's godswood stood ancient, trunk wide enough that 4 grown men could not encircle it fingertip to fingertip. Blood-red leaves fluttered despite windless air. Beneath the face carved in its bowl, a low platform now stood, draped in wolf-gray cloth. Lords gathered around in a wide semicircle, while small folk peered from beyond hedges, a loud, rare witness. Even Bran, the quiet lord in his wheeled chair, had come, bundled in furs, eyes half closed as though seeing through bark and sky at once. Gendry approached first, spear banner reversed, point down Dagdamoy. He stabbed it into soil before the tree. Then he turned, removed his leather gloves, and spoke. By hammer and blood I was born to nothing. By sword and fire I fought to be a man. By oath and deed I come before you now, asking not for crown or conquest, but for alliance, for unity, for the promise that no child north or south of the neck shall starve where granaries stand full, nor freeze while hearths burn bright. I set aside the stad's old roar of weakness, instead its steadfast courage, yoked to this darrow, very wolf. He stepped back. Arya advanced. She wore no gown, only black riding leathers, clean but unadorned, the knife visible at her thigh. She looked upon each face, friend, skeptic, foe, and then up into the red leaves where sunlight filtered crimson. I have worn many faces, she began, voice carrying farther than her slight frame suggested. I have been mouse and ghost, girl and assassin, sailor and sister. The world taught me sharp lessons, and I answered sharp in turn. But every road led home, and home is where the heart tree watches. Here, names matter. Stark is my name. With it I offer sanctuary for any who would rebuild what wildfire, White Walkers, and pride have shattered. I do not ask you to bend knee to me. I ask you to stand beside me. Let Direwolf guard the stag's flank. Let Stag clear the wolf's path. And let our children, when they come, inherit a realm healed. And no. She produced the ivory pommel Lady Dustin had given, held it high. This wolf's head waits for a blade yet forged. Today you will decide whether that blade will defend you. Silence fell. Somewhere in that hush, a raven croned. Lord Serwyn stepped forward first, dropping to one knee. How Serwyn stands with wolf and stag. Lady Serena followed, her bow deeper, and her son and sworn swords after. Lady Dustin tapped her cane, then knelt with surprising grace. Hornwoods kneeled, tall hearts, Risewell elves. Lord Smallwood bowed, though not kneeling, citing an old back wound. Yet his tone affirmed. The Manderley banners swayed as Lady Lena bent head. Even Ser Hendren Glover, sober and circumspect, pledged fealty. One by one the semicircle diminished to kneeling men and women, until only Sir Edmar Bolton remained upright, flanked by guards. All eyes fixed upon him. Blood stained his sleeve where a sentry held his arm too tight. Bolton spat in snow, but the droplets steamed, his breath ragged. I kneel to no bastard forge, he growled. No one spoke. The wind rustled, scattering red leaves over white. Arya waited, calm. Finally Bran's voice drifted, soft yet irresistible. Then kneel to honor Sir Edmar. Your house's sins weigh heavy. Let today's choice lighten them. Bolton's jaw worked. He dropped to one knee, awkward, grudging, but down. The collective breath of the assembly released. Above them the heart tree's face seemed to weep red sap, as if marking the moment. Gendry stepped beside Arya. Together they clasped hands at chest level, fingers interlaced. A cheer rose from the watching small folk, rolling through branches. It carried upward, over roofs, across ramparts, where ravens took it and launched skyward. The hours that followed blurred, signatures pressed into fresh parchment declaring the union of Wolfswood and Stormlands. Allocations assigned for the circuit courts. Festivals planned to celebrate harvest shipments promised from the Reach. Arya found herself thanking lords whose names once lived only in songs. Gendry moved among knights and scribes, translating Smith's language of metal into charters of roads and bridges. Near sunset Sansa guided them to the armory where Ned Stark's great anvil waited, dusted by time. Gendry approached reverently. He placed a billet of steel, smelted yesterday from the barrows of deepwood iron, upon the anvil's face. The pommel lay ready, as did a crosspiece shaped of antler, donated by Lord Serwyn. Arya rolled up snug sleeves despite the cold. "Shall we begin?" she asked. He met her gaze. Strike with me." They heated the billet until yellow-white. Gendry lifted a heavy hammer. Arya took a smaller one. Together, they pounded. Sparks cascaded like a summer storm. Each blow folded steel, driving impurity out. Sweat fogged the frigid air. Sansa watched, tears glimmering. For she saw not just a blade birthed, but her family's scars tempered. Hours later, when the metal cooled cherry, Gendry quenched it in a trough of wolfswood water. Steam ballooned, filling the forge with haze. From that haze rose a new sword, unfinished still, its edge to be ground, its fuller to be honed. But the shape had spoken. A broad northern bastard sword. Long enough for 2 hands yet, light enough for Arya's quick footwork, strong enough for Gendry's brute defense. The wolf's head pommel screwed home snug against the tang. The antler guard framed the blade like rising moon horns. He laid it on a velvet drape for the metal to rest, to decide if it liked its form. Arya stroked the fuller with a cloth, whispering something only the steel heard. Then she lifted her head to Gendry. In lamplight her eyes gleamed like the first winter star. "Feels right," she said. "It's only the first," he answered. "There will be many, Bladesbridge's laws. We shape them all." They left the forge arm in arm, trailing iron fragrance. Outside courtyards flickered with celebration fires. Fiddlers played rollicking tunes while bakers shoveled meat pies into hungry hands. Old soldiers swapped helms for tankards. Children dashed underfoot with wooden stags horned in paint, paper wolves tied to sticks. Above the din, a bell tolled 9 beats, yet the crowd seemed tireless. Arya and Gendry moved through this jubilance like a current, greeting, clasping shoulders, but soon slipped away across the snow-dusted gatehouse, onto the wind-swept practice yard. There, the noise faded to the hush of distant laughter. Stars salted the purple sky. The air smelled of applewood smoke. Arya drew in a breath. "One day," she said, "someone will sing this moment and think it happened in the blink of an eye. They'll miss the miles, the grit, the doubts. We'll tell our children different," Gendry replied. "That victory was not a crown but a road, long, rough, and ours to maintain." She turned to him, cheeks rosy. "Children. The Lords nearly pushed the question again today. We'll let the gods decide timing, as I said then. Though," he tucked a lock of her hair behind her ear, "the idea no longer frightens me." "Nor me," she confessed, surprising herself with the ease of it. "But first, we must carry this union south. The River Lords will test us. The Vale will fret over neutrality. The Reach, once stabilized, must break bread with us. Storm's End as well," he said, lifting a brow. "It still stands, though empty of crowned owner. I'll need to reclaim Father's old seat, prove I'm more than Robert's ghost. We ride after the thaw," Arya decided. "Visit each region not as conquerors but as builders. Show them what a wolf stag can do." He nodded. Wind flicked her cloak aside. He drew it back over her shoulders. "And perhaps along the way," he added, voice soft, "a simple septon can speak vows over us." Her heart skipped, a small, fierce lurch. She smiled, wide as open step. "No lavish ceremony," she said. "No great lords coaxing for place. Just trees, sky, old gods, and new, if they behave. And us." "Dyn." "Us," he echoed. They clasped forearms as warriors and let it slide into fingers entwined. Above them, the new banner on Winterfell's tallest turret unfurled fully in the steady north wind. The wolf leapt, the stag kicked, antlers and fur braided, silver thread catching starlight. For the first time, Arya felt not the weight of expectation, but the lift of shared destiny rising under her ribs like wings. She squeezed Gendry's hand. He squeezed back. Then together they faced the night, listening to their people sing below, each note a heartbeat, each flame a promise, each promise a step on the long winding road their dynasty would walk long after their own footprints faded into snow. Day key. Snowflakes spun on the morning breeze as Winterfell woke to the first day of the new age, softening the cold stone with a skin of white that blurred banners and distant trees. The Festival of Union began not with a herald's shout, but the steady thump of carpenters assembling a dais before the heart tree, axes biting wood. The rhythm of real work, not pomp. Arya watched from the window seat of her childhood room, knees hugged to her chest, her breath leaving faint fog on the glass. She did not need a mirror to know the shape of her own reflection. Lines of resolve sharpened by 1,000 miles and a dozen heartbreaks. Eyes not quite as wild as the wolf blood within, yet kindled now by something that felt like hope. The world looked wide from here. The quiet ended when Sansa swept in with a flurry of fur and crisp instructions. Gowns and tunics, she insisted, must be respectable, though Arya wrinkled her nose at silks and protested boots over slippers. Gendry appeared at the door a moment later, half-buttoned in new gray and gold, cheeks burned from the forge, hair rumpled by the chill. They shared a grin as Sansa fussed, the understanding of two who'd rather ride 100 leagues through rain than sit through a single hour of formal tailoring. Downstairs, the castle throbbed with preparation. Masons patched old cracks in the walls while cooks boiled vats of honeyed root, slicing onions until the whole lower bailey smelled sweet and sharp. Idhar. Bran sat in his wheeled chair by the well, silent and present, watching flocks of children play at wolf and stag with sticks for antlers and cloth masks sewn the night before. Sir Robin organized the guard shifts so that every house colors were seen at every post. No one excluded, no one favored, a subtle unity enforced by routine and custom. Mid-morning, as the wind picked up and bells tolled, the visiting lords and ladies filed into the godswood. Arya entered with Gendry, not ahead and not behind, but side by side, their cloaks almost touching. The assembled council, Sansa at their center, Bran to one side, Maester Walken behind with his ink-stained ledger, faced the new pair with a gravity that was not so much judgment as anticipation. For the first time since the council began, Arya felt the strange hush of eyes not searching for weakness, but for the flicker of vision, the courage of those about to choose. Sansa called the assembly to order with a single word, "Now? No more?" and silence rippled outward. Arya met the gaze of each house, the hard set of Lady Glover's mouth, the pale watchfulness of Lady Dustin, the calculating light behind Lord Smallwood's eyes, the guarded hope in Lady Lena Manderley. She felt a pulse, the heart tree's silent witness at her back, a rhythm older than any crown. Gendry spoke first, voice steady and deep. "I have built horseshoes and sword blades, repaired wheels and locks, but the hardest thing to mend is what was broken in the war. The trust between houses, the line between north and south. I come not as king or conqueror, but as a man who knows the weight of hunger and the fear of cold. My house is yours if you'll have me. My hand is open. My oath is iron." He unsheathed the new bastard sword, the wolf's head and antler crossguard gleaming, and laid it across both palms, offering it to the council, blade flat, no threat. Arya added her own knife, the thin, long dagger that had cut throats and bred, both weapons lying side by side. "I learned to fight in shadows, and I learned to lead in the open," Arya said, her voice clear as the water running under the castle. "I have been many things, faceless, nameless, vengeful, lost. But today, I stand with the name given me at birth, and I swear it to every house here. This is not the beginning of a new tyranny, or the end of the old world by fire and blood. It is a vow to build what we never had, what we deserve, not as lord and lady, but as partners, as equals, as the first of a line that will remember the faces of all those who choose to join." "Oh." She paused, letting the cold settle, letting the words breathe, and then bent to press her palm to the wolf's head on the sword's pommel. Gendry did the same, their hands meeting, and the silence broke not with cheers, but with the soft thud of knees meeting earth. First Lady Glover, then Hornwood, then all but Lady Dustin and Lord Smallwood, who remained standing yet bowed their heads. Bran spoke, his voice a whisper, but it reached the farthest leaves. "Let it be known. The gods see. The people see. The realm is remade by hands as much as by crowns. The vows came next, not the trappings of faith or seven, or even the old gods, but the vows of work. Gendry swore to open the smithies to all, to repair the old bridges, to share the secrets of the Baratheon forges, and not hoard them for power. Arya swore to ride the circuit every year, to settle disputes not as a judge above, but as a listener among, to see the faces and not just the names in her ledger. Then Sansa, now truly Lady of Winterfell, the glue that had held it all together, added her voice. What you begin here is not just union, but a promise that the next winter, the next war, will find us together, not alone. Her hand trembled only once as she drew a new charter from her sleeve, the ink still faintly smudged from the candle it had dried by. Sign this, all who wish to join. Baratheon and Stark, and every name that would ride beneath their banner. Nestan. The council signed, seal by seal, line by line. Glover, Hornwood, Tallheart, Manderley, Dustin, Smallwood, Serwyn, and then the wildling Skjorn who marked the parchment with a blood-red thumbprint, the first of her clan to ever do so. The afternoon rolled in with the smell of baking bread and roasting venison. Musicians filled the great hall with reels and slow ballads. The small folk pressed inside and filled the rafters. Arya mingled, sleeves rolled to the elbow, carving slices of meat for children who stared in awe at the lady with the knife. Listening to their tales of lost goats, missing cousins, the petty aches and stubborn joys of a land that had survived. Gendry fixed a broken hinge on a barn door without a word, handed out nails from a pouch on his belt, laughed with the cooks when flour dusted his tunic. Outside, the banners flapped in unison on the towers, wolf and stag together. No one remembered such a sight since the days of the first men, before dragons and ships and southern ambitions, before even the wall. When the sun fell and the last feast was served, Arya slipped out to the godswood. She knelt in the snow, breathing the sharp air, feeling the ache in her shoulders from a day of smiling and meeting every eye. She spoke aloud, not expecting answer. If you're watching, Father, Mother, Rob, Rickon, know we remember. Know we build, not just survive. Gendry found her there, snow on his brow, the sword across his back. He crouched, wordless, and laid his hand on hers. They sat until the stars wheeled overhead, and the fires in the windows died one by one. It was days before the lords departed. Messages flew across the north and the riverlands, to the Vale, and even to Tarth, where Brienne sent back a letter of such blunt approval that Arya laughed out loud at the kitchen table. Gendry spent those days in the forges and the stables, teaching children to set a shoe and showing young women how to bend nails straight. Arya rode every road, checked the watch, sat at tables with stewards and farmers, making lists of grain and timber, noting who grumbled and who boasted. Sansa managed the castle with a deftness Arya envied. But even Sansa had to confess, she did not know how to keep the mules from eating the hay before the horses got their fill. One morning, as the snow finally slackened and the first crows dared to call spring, Arya and Gendry gathered the council again, not for war or celebration, but for planning. The circuit court, they agreed, would start in Winterfell and make a grand circuit down through Torrhen's Square, Baratheon, Deepwood Motte, and across the neck to the ruins of Moat Cailin, then swing south by ferry to White Harbor, and from there by ship to the Stormlands once the snows melted and the rivers were passable. They sent for trusted folk from both regions, old maesters, keen-eyed women, younger sons and daughters who had not yet grown cynical. Each would ride a part of the circuit, settling disputes, mapping fields, judging harvests, sending word back to the council in Winterfell. No one voice would rule. The hope was that in many voices, wisdom would root deeper. The work began. Scribes copied the new laws, clerks tallied tithes, smiths worked day and night on new plows and hinges and nails. The old bridges of the north, some just logs over rivers, others grand arches from the time of the kings of winter, were measured and surveyed. Masons went south with carpenters from the Stormlands, so the wood and stone mingled on the roads. For every quarrel that broke out, a farm line, a tryst gone bad, a debt unpaid. There were two new friendships, a daughter of the Manderless writing to a cousin in Duskendale, a wildling child showing a Stormlander lad how to set a trap in the snow, Gendry's work multiplied. Soon he oversaw teams of smiths in every major keep, not as master but as brother. He taught his own craft without pride, and in doing so, learned new tricks. How the Manderleys made fishhooks from old ship's nails, how the Glovers twisted rope from pine roots. Arya shadowed him sometimes, but more often rode ahead or behind, searching out the quiet places, the lonely folk who had no voice in council. Her gift was to hear the stories that others missed. The boy who fed his family by trapping birds, the widow who patched furs for her neighbors, the crippled man who knew every track in the Wolf's Wood by heart. Everywhere they went, the new banner went with them. Some spat at it, some cheered, but none could ignore it. At inns, at crossroads, on the docks at White Harbor, and in the ruins of Moat Cailin, it hung, sometimes tattered, sometimes freshly mended, but always present. Months passed. The snow melted, the rivers ran high, the roads grew passable, and the first great convoy of food and timber and new minted coin rolled south, guarded by an equal mix of Northmen and Stormlanders. In Deepwood Motte, Arya settled a blood feud by calling both families to the Godswood and refusing to leave until they spoke not of debts, but of futures. Children to be wed, fields to be shared, hounds to be exchanged as tokens of truce. Gendry rebuilt the old bellows, so the smithy could pour iron anew for the first time in a generation. In White Harbor, Lady Lena Manderley hosted the pair for a feast that lasted 3 days. Merchants from Braavos and the Summer Isles packed the harbor, and Arya walked the quays at dawn with Gendry, talking to every sailor who would give her a tale. She paid for news with silver and stories of her own, always hungry for what moved in the wider world. Rebellions, pirates, dragons whispered to be stirring in the east. It was there, watching the sun glint on the sea, that Arya turned to Gendry and said, "I want to go farther. Not now, not soon, but someday, when our work is done." He smiled, rubbing at the scar on his hand. "When our work is done, the world will be smaller than it seems. We can see it all together." She laughed, light and sudden. "You say that now? Wait until you see the storms off the Stepstones, or the sands of the Shadowlands, or the markets in Yeti where nothing smells like home. Menshim. He drew her close, the wind tangling their cloaks. "If you're there, it will be home enough for me." She looked back at the castle, at the banners, at the fleet being readied with food and gifts. "Before that, I want to see our banner in Storm's End. I want to ride those walls, look out over the sea, and see what kind of kingdom we've built." He nodded, solemn and sure. "Then we'll go. Together." New? When the council reconvened at Winterfell, it was with twice as many banners and twice as many voices. The Reach sent word, uncertain, yet willing. The Riverlands were fractious but curious. Even the Vale, proud and aloof, sent a squire with a white falcon badge, asking for terms of trade. Dorne sent no envoy, but a letter arrived from Sunspear, sunburnt, and inked in a woman's flowing hand, congratulating Arya on her victories in the north, and offering a basket of blood oranges and spices. By the next year, when the harvest was in and the roads were clear, the first court rode south for Storm's End. Arya and Gendry led, but not alone. Behind them, banners of every house in the north, new riders from the Riverlands, and even a handful of wildlings and knights, watchmen on leave, their black cloaks trimmed with the smallest green or gold braids, signifying their allegiance not just to the wall, but to the realm being forged beyond it. Storm's End was no easy conquest. Its walls stood as they had for centuries, vast and forbidding, the sea pounding at their feet. The Castellan who greeted them was wary, the small folk fearful of northern lords. Yet Arya rode in first, Gendry at her side, the banner unfurled, and the promise of trade and peace and help with the battered fishing fleet. She walked every wall, listened to every complaint, ate the tough bread and thin fish stew of the poorest folk. She let the sea wind tangle her hair and the salt bite her lips. Gendry knelt in the chapel, built by his father's ancestors, and swore his loyalty, not to ghosts, but to the living. The castle smithy was silent. The great bellows collapsed, and the forge cold, But Gendry fired it again, and soon the smoke rose from the chimneys, as it had in Robert's youth. He promised the smiths a share of every new contract, a cut of every coin struck with a new wolf stag, and in return, they built for the whole region, not just for the lords. In the days that followed, Arya convened a court on the wind-blasted green before the castle. Every house of the Stormlands sent someone. Some grumbled, some tested, some demanded proof of coin or muscle or patience. She answered each not with speeches, but with presence, riding with the patrols, helping to build the fish traps, mending a fence that had kept out the sheep for years. In the evenings, she sat with the old women and the children, and she listened. Word spread. Ships came and went, bringing grain, iron, wool, and rumor. By midsummer, the trade routes were open from White Harbor to Storm's End, and the first festival of the Wolf Stag was held in the open, with the Godswood's branches hung with ribbons and the castle filled with laughter. At the heart of it all, Arya and Gendry stood together. They danced the first dance, hands entwined, not as lord and lady, but as equals. When the crowd pressed close and the music surged, Arya whispered, "We will always be moving, won't we?" Gendry smiled, strong and gentle. "The wheel turns, but we turn with it, not under it." She rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes against the noise, against 1,000 demands, letting herself believe, for one moment, in the simple truth of what they'd made. Not a perfect world, but a new one. A home not just for Starks or Baratheons, but for anyone willing to build, to mend, to begin again. The feast lasted through the night and into the dawn. When Arya stepped onto the battlements to greet the sunrise, Gendry came to her side. Below, the sea rolled, endless and blue. Behind, the castle bustled with the work of another day. She looked to him, a half smile on her lips. "This is only the beginning." He squeezed her hand, the warmth of it steady as the first morning fire in a northern hearth. "The beginning," he echoed. And together, they watched the world wake to the first true day of their dynasty. A world not ruled, but remade. In the shape of two hands clasped, two banners entwined, a promise alive in every breath of the cold, clean air. Ni-Ka. The castle at Storm's End stood vigilant in the wind, battered by foam and thunder, the drumbeat of waves against the cliff like a memory of ancient war. But within, the ancient halls glowed with more than candlelight, a sense of anticipation, of the old bones of the place stirring to life. The banners of Stark and Baratheon hung side by side for the first time, their silks trembling in the salt-washed drafts. Arya awoke before dawn in a small room high in the storm tower. The world outside the arrow slit painted a dull violet by the dying night. The rushes on the floor smelled of rosemary and seaweed. She stretched, feeling the ache of travel, the weariness of months on the road, and the burdens of listening, negotiating, leading. But she also felt the unmistakable charge that ran in her veins every time she stood at the start of something, every time the next step was not yet written. Gendry was already gone from the bed, the covers still warm where he'd lain. She found him in the inner yard, stripped to the waist, a hammer in hand, sleeves tied around his neck, hair damp with sea mist. He worked a length of iron into a new hinge for the gatehouse. Soot streaked his forearms. The castle smithy was awake again, and even the old master smith, who'd served since Robert's time, watched with approval as Gendry brought the metal to shape. No trace of pride, only the steady focus of someone remaking the world in small, unheralded ways. "Come to help or to gawk?" he said, eyes glinting as he saw Arya approach. She picked up a file from the tool bench, tossed it from hand to hand. "If I helped, the whole castle might fall apart by sundown." He grinned, but there was seriousness beneath it. "Some things are best built slow, with care. You taught me that, son." She watched him a moment longer, the hammer's rhythm a calming pulse. Then together, they strolled through the inner ward. The wind tugged her cloak. She could smell the sea, the wild rosemary, the oil of new forged iron. People bowed their heads as she passed, but there was less stiffness, more curiosity in the faces. This was not her father's north or the tense aftermath of the wars. Here, Questions outnumbered traditions. By mid-morning, the castle was awake and humming. Sansa's letter had arrived in the night, reporting peace in the north, the circuit courts running. A banditry outbreak near Baratheon quelled by joint patrols of Karstark and Hornwood men, working together, which would have shocked the old lords. In the yard, Arya gathered the local stewards, Stormlander knights and hedgelords, Storm's End's castellan, and the heads of the lesser houses. Each had their grievances, their lists, their quiet doubts about this new order. She listened, as always, her fingers busy on her ledger. Lord Selwyn Tarth, pink-cheeked and salt-stiff, pressed his case about the taxes from the new sea lanes. Ser Boros Buckler wanted assurances about the rights of his river to run unmolested by Manderley fishers. The Dondarrion steward, his eye still haunted from wars past, grumbled about patrols and the cost of timber from the north. And everywhere, beneath the surface, the question of loyalty simmered. Loyalty to the new banner, to the cause, to the uneasy partnership. Gendry did not speak until the last, but when he did, he set his words like stakes in hard earth. You want Storm's End strong again? Then build with us. Trade with us. Share in the profit, share in the cost. No more tolls for allies, no more taxes that starve the farms to fill one man's coffers. We keep the peace with steel and honesty, not with threats. He stood tall among them, not as a high-born lord, but as a craftsman who'd earned his scars. You want to be heard, you come to me, or to Arya. No one will be turned away. There was pushback, of course, and Arya welcomed it. Debate was how she sifted for truth. She watched the crowd, the way men looked to women before answering, the way young stewards listened more than the older knights. She marked every name, every hesitation, and made a mental note to visit each holdfast, no matter how small. When the meeting ended, Arya lingered. Lord Selwyn caught her eye. You speak with sense, Lady Stark, but sense is not always enough to mend old wrongs. The March Lords remember every slight from 100 years back. Then let them remember this day too, she said, when we made something new. He smiled, weathered and a little sad. Time will tell. By afternoon, she and Gendry rode with a dozen of the Storm's End riders across the windy grasslands east of the keep, following the cliff edge to a crumbling watchtower. From here, the whole of the Stormlands unrolled in a patchwork of green and gray, and the foaming, endless sea. Villages dotted the land, smoke rising from cooking fires, the odd shimmer of banners on the main road. Arya saw where the fields had been burned by pirates the previous year. Scars that would take seasons to heal. But she also saw new fences, fresh sown barley, the first tents of the northern masons camped beside the river. She stopped her horse, heart pounding with the wildness of the air. Gendry drew up beside her, breathing deep. You could run for 100 leagues and not hit a wall, he said, awed. I could, she said, and for a moment the urge to go, to vanish over the next ridge, was strong. But she looked back at the riders, at the banner streaming from Gendry's spear, at the far shape of the castle on its promontory. But we have walls to build, not just in stone. Nestrandir. A rider approached from the east, a young woman in green and white livery, the mark of House Errol. She dismounted and handed Arya a sealed letter. From the Marches, my lady. Trouble near the Kingswood, raiders in the old castles. Arya read it on the spot. Bandits, maybe more, driven north by the chaos in the Riverlands. She looked at Gendry. We go, she said. They left with only 2 companions, crossing the hills at a trot. The marches were wild, the kind of country that bred legends. Arya had heard tales as a girl of the outlaws in the woods, the kings who hid in caves, the battles fought under moonlight. Now she saw the truth. The burned farmhouses, the wary eyes at the village edge, the men who did not trust lords or banners, but took what they needed by force or cunning. At the largest of these ruined holds, they found the bandits, a rough company, not cruel, but desperate, half-starved and armed with mismatched blades. Their leader was a woman, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp with hunger and resolve. She met Arya in the ruined hall, the fire burning in a broken hearth. No banners, no shields. We take only what we must, the woman said, voice hoarse with exhaustion. The lords left us to starve." Arya listened, asked her questions. She believed what she heard and what she saw. Gendry stepped in when tempers flared, his presence a reminder of muscle but never a threat. Arya offered them food, work on the roads, the chance to mend their names by mending the land. Some refused, others wept, a few even laughed, unbelieving, but the offer was made. In the days that followed, Arya and Gendry traveled the marches, village by village, solving disputes, settling debts, sending messages back to Storm's End for supplies. They did not return in triumph, but with new friends, new allies, even a few old enemies who grudgingly accepted the new order. The bandit leader, her name was Malin, rode with them, speaking for those who'd had no voice in the old councils. By the time they returned to Storm's End, the court was abuzz with new talk. Riverlords sending envoys, the Val Esquire returning with an offer of marriage for a minor cousin, the Reach Lord sending grain as promised. Arya and Gendry stood before the council and recounted what they'd seen, what they'd done. Sansa, visiting from Winterfell, listened carefully, then nodded her approval. "The realm is changing," Sansa said to them privately that night. "It's not just a matter of banners or bridges. You're building something new from the marrow out." "It's hard," Arya admitted. "Everywhere we go, there's another wrong to mend." "It always will be," Sansa replied. "But the difference is, now people have a chance to mend with you." Gendry took Arya's hand as they walked the ramparts after the council. The moon was high, the wind sharp. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "All this, never having a quiet life?" She smiled, tired and fierce. "I think I'd die of boredom in a quiet life." He laughed, pulling her close. "Then we're well matched." Letters poured in over the next weeks. From Brienne on Tarth, whose Council of Knights had voted to join the Union, promising ships and strong arms to keep the seas safe. From Old Town, where the maesters sent treatises and scribes, eager to help build libraries in the Stormlands and North. From the Free Cities, cautious, but intrigued by the new trade lanes. Arya took it all in, restless and eager. Gendry organized more smiths, oversaw the building of a new harbor at Shipbreaker Bay, met with lords by day and worked iron by night. Children followed him, watching as he made toys and tools, teaching those who would learn. Arya rode the roads, meeting with hedge knights and farmers, mapping every village and holdfast, noting what was needed, what could be spared, where old feuds simmered. At every festival, every moot, she made it her habit to ask the names of the oldest grandmothers, the youngest apprentices, the bastard children and wildlings and crannogmen. She listened to songs, to prayers, to complaints. In each, she found something worth keeping. A story, a hope, a promise. When she returned to Storm's End, her ledger was full, but so was her heart. The harvest came late, but it came strong. Grain from the Reach, fish from the Stormlands, wool from the North, iron and salt and timber from every corner of the new realm. When the first snows dusted the high passes, Arya stood with Gendry on the highest parapet and watched as the convoys rolled in. Lumbering carts, sleek riverboats, whole families come to trade and feast. In the great hall of Storm's End, she and Gendry held court. The council grew, a wildling man from the north, Malin from the marches, a maester from Old Town, a river woman who knew every twist of the trident, a boy from the Summer Isles who could read 5 languages. The council met in the mornings, the afternoons reserved for hearing petitioners and resolving disputes. Sometimes the arguments grew heated. Old rivalries flared, and Arya found herself wishing for a simpler task, a single blade to solve the problem. But she remembered the lesson of the wolf and the stag. Force and patience, together. One night, after a council session that had run far past sundown, Arya wandered alone through the silent halls. She paused at a window overlooking the sea, the moon silvering the waves. She thought of her mother, her father, her lost brothers. She missed them terribly, but she felt them in the stones beneath her feet, in the wind rattling the glass, in the laughter and noise of the castle she and Gendry had brought back to life. Gendry found her there, arms crossed against the chill. He wrapped her in his cloak, and they stood together, silent, listening to the sea. "We've made something," she said at last. "I don't know what it is yet. But it feels like it's ours." "It is," he said. "And it will last. Because you built it to last." They did not speak of children, or the future, or the shadow of winter that always lurked at the edge of every plan. But as they watched the dawn break over Storm's End, the promise of it glimmered, steady as the tide. The seasons turned. Winter's bite was less harsh, softened by the flow of goods, the unity of houses. The roads were busy, the inns full, the courts bustling. Arya and Gendry traveled, riding circuit from north to south, from White Harbor to the Stormlands, across bridges they had rebuilt, past fields they had seen sown. Each time they returned, the world seemed a little wider, the old wounds a little less raw. One spring, word came from the Wall, an outbreak of fever in the shadow of the Frostfangs. Arya rode north with healers and wagons of supplies, braving the wild wind and the last snowdrifts. She sat with the sick, tended wounds, listened to the stories of the Night's Watch, the wildlings, the children of the forest, who came to offer herbs and old wisdom. She sent word back to Gendry, and he sent food and blankets, smiths to mend the gates. In the quiet hours, she walked the wall, staring out over the white wild, feeling the pull of the road, the hunger for what lay beyond. But she always returned to Gendry, to the council, to the people who needed her. As the years passed, the legend grew. Songs were sung in the inns of White Harbor and the docks of Storm's End. The tale of the wolf and the stag who built a new world, who listened, who healed, who fought side by side, and never turned away from hardship. Children grew up, knowing that their lords and ladies were not distant figures, but people who rode the same roads, worked the same fields, who remembered names and faces, who brought food in winter and justice in every season. And when, at last, Arya stood with Gendry beneath the heart tree in Winterfell, their hair touched with the first gray of years, their hands strong from work and weather, she knew that what they had built would outlast them. The dynasty was not just blood, not just name. It was the bond between those who dared to dream, to fight, to heal. It was every promise kept, every wrong mended, every hand held out in trust. She looked at Gendry, the same spark in his eyes as the first day, and smiled. "Home," she said. He squeezed her hand. And always, together. Mine." And so it was, as the bells rang across the north and the south, as the banners snapped in the wind, as the people gathered to mark the passing of another season, that the Baratheon Stark dynasty endured, not in thrones or wars, but in the living, beating heart of a land remade, a future open and unbroken, shaped by the hands of those brave enough to build it. A.K. The years ripened like fruit under careful tending, not always sweet and never simple. Arya rode the circuit every season, her boots never cold for long in one castle or keep. Gendry was everywhere at once, supervising new forges at Maidenpool, sending blue enameled plows upriver to the Crannyman, holding council with the Mandarys beneath the green-mossed arches of White Harbor. Letters flowed between them, sometimes crisp and formal with updates and courtly plans, sometimes hurried, a scrawl in the margin about a cracked blade or a wild rumor from the Dornish marches. Each always closed with a mark only the other would understand, the outline of a direwolf's paw pressed beside the print of a stag's hoof. The world changed around them, and with each new alliance, each fresh challenge, the Baratheon Stark union grew, from uncertain experiment to living dynasty, as real as the frost that still dusted Winterfell's stones each autumn, as solid as the basalt beneath Storm's End. They drew from both lines, wolf and stag, winter and tempest, balancing the stoic patience of the north with the restless drive of the Stormlands. Arya found herself wielding words with almost as much precision as her blade, parrying the sly criticisms of old houses, untangling the feuds that arose in every gathering of proud men and women. Gendry's calloused hands became familiar in halls once wary of his name. His laughter, deep, honest, sudden, earned him loyal friends in unexpected places. In the third year, as the spring broke cold but clear, Their first child was born. A daughter, black hair, wild as Arya's had once been, eyes as pale as dawn on the wall. They named her Lyra. Sansa held her at her naming day in the heart tree's shadow, Bran offering the blessing in a whisper that carried on the wind, as if the old gods themselves hushed the boughs to listen. From the beginning, Lyra ran before she walked, toddling from forges to kennels to council chambers, never content to sit in a single place or answer to a single voice. As Lyra grew, the Union changed again. Old enemies saw that this was not a fragile alliance, but a new root driving deep into the soil of Westeros. Some tried to break it, plotting in the Vale or stirring old hatreds in the Riverlands. But each plot found itself unraveled not by spies, but by Arya's tireless writing, her habit of knowing every name and listening to every servant's story. When a minor Tully lord threatened rebellion, Arya did not send soldiers. She rode herself to the muddy banks of the Tumblestone, broke bread at the Lord's own hearth, and left with not just fealty renewed, but a trade in horses and salt that would enrich the river for a generation. Gendry's influence ran just as deep. He created a school at Storm's End, open to any with the patience to learn the trade. Smiths, farriers, coopers, even the cleverest bakers, eager to understand the secrets of the ovens and kilns. Wildling boys stood side by side with southern girls, learning to shape metal and work leather, and many of these apprentices rode north to Winterfell or east to White Harbor, carrying with them the stories of what the wolf and the stag had built. One winter, when the cold pressed down heavier than any in memory, grain ran short in the Stormlands, and sickness swept through the coastal villages, Arya rode the blizzard's edge, bearing healing herbs from the Crannogmen and draughts brewed in Old Town. Gendry organized a fleet of riverboats to bring barley from the Reach, braving storms that wrecked lesser captains. The people remembered that help came not just with banners and horns, but with real hands in the cold, hands that carried, soothed, worked without rest. In the north, Arya's reputation became legend. She was the lady who rode without guards, the judge who slept beside the hearths of the poorest villages, who hunted wolves with the Umbers and shared salt with the fishermen of White Night. She never forgot her beginnings. Every spring she spent one night in the woods with nothing but a knife and bread, listening to the old voices in the wind. Gendry, when he could, joined her, and together they built a language of glances and silences that needed no translation. Their son was born on a rain-lashed morning in Storm's End, the wind shrieking so fiercely that it was said the child's first cry answered it. He was named Rickard for Arya's grandfather and for Gendry's old friend, the smith who had taught him his first lessons in King's Landing. Rickard was more reserved than his sister, but just as stubborn. He loved maps and horses, and before he was 10, he had charted every hidden path from Winterfell's Godswood to the orchards of Hornhill. The family traveled constantly, rarely settling in one castle for more than a season. Lyra learned to wield bow and blade at Arya's side, as quick in the saddle as any knight, while Rickard listened to every blacksmith and mason, peppering them with questions until he could name the lineage of any blade in the armory. When they rode out together, small folk in field and forge alike called greetings, offering news and troubles, recipes and riddles, and Arya made sure no complaint, no matter how petty, was ever dismissed. In time, Gendry became as much legend as Arya, though he never lost his humility. His forge in Storm's End drew craftsmen from as far as old Volantis and Lys, all eager to see the smith who had risen from the gutters to remake a kingdom. Yet he spent as many hours teaching the youngest apprentices as he did shaping the finest swords. He oversaw the rebuilding of the old sea walls and the restoration of the shattered fishing fleet. When the shipwrights of the Arbor sent their best to Storm's End, Gendry worked beside them, learning their methods and teaching them the secrets of Northern Iron. But peace is always a thing of effort, never a thing of luck. As the Union flourished, so too did the envy of those left outside it. Raiders from the Stepstones plagued the coasts, and one grim spring, a conspiracy of southern lords tried to foment rebellion in the Reach, hiring sellswords from Essos. News reached Arya as she rode circuit near the Neck. She dispatched word to Gendry, then rode south, sending trusted friends ahead to rouse the loyal banners. The trouble was real, but the old ways failed. Where rebels expected armies, they found a host of small folk blocking roads, loyal to Arya not for her name but for her deeds. Gendry smiths sabotaged the rebel supply lines, horses shod to slip, swords brittle, wagons seized in the night by villagers who had learned to trust the Wolfstag banner. When Arya finally confronted the would-be usurper, a second cousin of the Hightowers, hiding in a crumbling tower above Bitterbridge, she offered him a choice: trial before the circuit court, or exile to the wall. He chose exile. Arya sent him north with food, coin, and a promise that if he ever raised blade against the Union again, she would come for him herself. Each crisis taught them something new. The council that once fit in a single hall now spanned all of Winterfell's crypts, the Storm's End Chapel, the Windblown Tower at White Harbor, even the Merman's Hall in Sisterton. Arya and Gendry insisted every council include women, wildlings, bastards, septons, and the poorest stewards. Old men muttered, but the results spoke for themselves. Crime fell, roads improved, feuds were settled more often by negotiation than by blood. Through all this, the next generation grew. Lyanna and Rickard learned as their parents had, by doing. Arya taught her daughter the secret paths, the old prayers, the trick of moving silent and fast, of seeing the heart of a lie. Gendry taught Rickard to bend iron and break a horse, to know the balance of a blade by feel, to judge a man's worth by the strength of his word. The children became friends to many, admired by some, envied by a few. They were not coddled. Lyanna spent a winter as a page in Deepwood Motte, Rickard a summer with the fishermen of Sisterton, learning the cost of survival and the value of friendship. As the decades passed, Arya's hair silvered at the temples, Gendry's hands grew knotted, but neither lost their vigor. They grieved losses. Sansa, gone at last after years of wise rule, honored by all the North. Bran, whose sight faded into the weirwood's roots, his last blessing, whispered to Arya alone, one dusk beneath the heart tree. The friends of their youth aged too, some lost to winter, some to time, some to the hazards of living too fiercely. Yet the realm they had shaped endured. Wildlings and Northmen intermarried. Southern merchants sent their sons north to apprentice with the smiths of Storm's End. The walls were strong, the fields well tended, the ports bustling. Arya sat at council, her ledger replaced by a memory so sharp it shamed younger scribes. Gendry's great smithy blazed every night. The clangor of his hammer, a music that echoed through the valleys. The greatest challenge came in the 40th year of their rule, when drought struck the riverlands and the Vale in the same summer, and rumors of dragons, real this time, not just tales, spread from the east. Arya rode east to the Fingers, seeking word from smugglers and fishermen. Gendry organized the shipment of grain by sea and river, and Lyra led the first true fleet of the new dynasty up the Green Fork, defying pirates and storms to deliver food to the hungry. When a dragon was sighted at last, a young male, wild and wounded, circling the ruins of Harrenhal, Arya went herself, unarmed, walking through the shattered towers by moonlight, letting the beasts see her, hear her, know her scent. She spoke to it as she might have spoken to Nymeria, low and without fear. And in the morning it was gone, leaving only a burnt patch of grass and a single feather, black as the night. The people took it as a sign. The wolf and the stag could tame anything, even the fireborn of old Valyria. Years later, as Arya's steps slowed and Gendry's beard turned white, the realm looked back on the age they had wrought. Song and story mixed with memory, some exaggerated, some true. But the most enduring tales were told not in the great halls, but by the firesides of small folk, in forges and fields and fishing boats. They said that Arya and Gendry, the wolf and the stag, had founded not just a dynasty, but a way of living, a law that cared, a rule that listened, a peace that required daily courage. They had not tried to end all trouble, only to answer it with honest hands, open eyes, and an open road for anyone brave enough to walk it. And as Arya sat one last time beneath the heart tree in the Godswood, Lyanna and Rickard beside her, the branches whispering overhead, she felt no fear of what would come after. She pressed her palm to the scarred bark, remembering every step, every promise, every loss and gain. She looked at Gendry, who smiled through the weariness of age, and she felt in that moment the old thrill, the pulse of possibility. This, she thought, was the heart of it all. To keep walking, to keep building, to never let the road end so long as there was someone left who needed a path. The dynasty would go on. Her children's children would ride the circuit, hold court, listen and learn, make mistakes and mend them, and with every season, the wolf and the stag would run the wild hills of Westeros, never tamed, never still, forever joined. And in the silence beneath the weirwood's gaze, Arya Stark of Winterfell, last of her line and founder of a new one, closed her eyes and let the peace she had made settle at last in her bones, a peace earned, not given, and in that earning, made eternal. Autumn painted the north in gold and rust. Smoke curled from every chimney in Winterfell, the scent of apples stewing, barley bread rising, the musk of wet leaves ground underfoot. There was a fullness to the realm, a sense of harvest after long labor, as if the land itself had finally exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. Arya walked slow, wrapped in furs, through the godswood where the last leaves drifted down like embers. At her side strode Lyanna, long-legged, dark-haired, her eyes fierce as Arya's once were. Mother and daughter spoke in quiet tones, sharing the news from Storm's End and the Riverlands, the way women who rule do, leaning close, matching step for step, each measuring the other's mind as they spoke. The old godswood pool was mirrored glass, the weirwood's red leaves scattered across it like drops of blood. Arya paused at the bank, watching her reflection next to Lyanna's. So much changed, and yet the same bones beneath, Stark in the angle of the jaw, Baratheon in the proud set of the brow. Lyanna reached out, brushing a leaf from her mother's sleeve. The touch casual, affectionate, but also a silent assertion. I am grown. I am here. They circled the heart tree, the air thick with the hush of falling leaves. Arya spoke first of the new council, the reforms Lyanna pushed for, greater shares for the riverfolk, seats for the wildlings, more voices from the marches. Lyanna argued for them as a smith hammers at iron, persistent, direct, confident that justice could be forged as surely as a blade. Arya countered with the caution of years, reminding her that too quick change risked splintering the unity that kept the realm whole. Their debate was sharp but loving, and Lyanna did not yield easily. Arya admired that most of all. In the High Hall, Gendry listened to Rickard, their son, reciting tallies of trade from the White Knife and contracts with Sisterton. Rickard's talent for numbers had grown with the years, his sharp memory and knack for diplomacy smoothing negotiations. Even the old lords found thorny. Gendry nodded, patient, asking hard questions. Where the timber came from, whose fields had suffered blight, which captains could be trusted with the grain barges. He respected his son's mind, but demanded rigor, never letting flattery or hope replace hard truth. Outside, the court buzzed. Delegates from the Reach, the Vale, even Dorne mingled in the yard. The wolf-stag banner, now grown familiar across 2 generations, hung from every window. Carpenters repaired gates. Stonemasons checked the walls. Wildling children played at knights and counselors, shrieking across the bailey. It was a living castle, neither fossilized in old grief nor remade as something unrecognizable. The heart of the north beat strong, and its pulse echoed all the way south to the storm-racked cliffs of Shipbreaker Bay. The time came for the autumn moot, the council that gathered each year to debate the season's troubles and make plans for the winter ahead. Arya sat at the head of the long table, Gendry at her left, Lyanna at her right, Rickard beside her, then Sansa's grandchildren and the other chief lords. The room was filled with the hush of expectation. The first speaker, an aged wildling matron, rose to speak of the winter stores, her voice steady despite the crowd. She thanked the council for the new granaries built along the King's Road, then pressed for more. She wanted wildling healers trained in every major holdfast. Lyanna promised a trial program before the first frost. Next came the master of ships, complaining of pirates off Cape Wrath, their numbers swelling as trade grew. Rickard laid out plans for a convoy system, then yielded the floor to a Dornish envoy who pressed for free trade in spices and silk, offering oranges and olives for winter oats. Arya listened, mediating, steering the talk away from the old wounds. Red Mountains, Blackwater Rush, the long memory of southern battles, toward new pacts and honest reckonings. The moot stretched long into the night. At times it frayed when a quarrel broke out between Manderley and Umber, when a dispute over river tariffs grew heated. But every argument found resolution, even if only in postponement. The council had learned Arya's habits. No man or woman could storm out without their voice heard, and none would leave without a path to return. Liara watched, learning, and so did dozens of younger bannermen and stewards, marking each lesson in silence. Afterward, as the torches guttered and the delegates retired, Arya found herself alone with Liara and Rickard in the echoing hall. She felt the fatigue of age, not in her limbs, but in the heaviness behind her eyes. A gentle weariness, like the ache after a long ride. Liara poured mulled wine, her movements brisk but gentle, while Rickard fetched bread and cheese. "You did well tonight," Arya told them, breaking the quiet. "It will get harder," Liara said. "As the realm grows, more voices, more need. I can't ride to every holdfast, not even in a year. That's why you must trust," Arya answered. "Delegate. Listen, don't forget what you learned in the villages when you went alone." Rickard smiled, tearing bread. "And remember to eat before the fourth debate of the day. Even the best counselor needs a strong stomach." "Din Pinter. Demo." They laughed, the moment lightening, but beneath it was something sober, an unspoken passing of the torch. Arya looked at her children, saw the strength in Liara's jaw, the shrewdness in Rickard's gaze, the balance of boldness and patience that marked their union. For the first time, she wondered if it was time to let go of the last responsibilities, to yield more than just tasks and titles. The next morning, she rose before dawn and walked the battlements. Mist clung to the yard, erasing the world beyond the walls. She stood where her father once stood, looking out across the frosted fields. There was a quiet at this hour she found nowhere else. Soon, Liara joined her, pulling her cloak close against the cold. "I can't do it the way you did," Liara said, voice soft, almost uncertain. "I'm not you." Arya studied her daughter's face, seeing in her both wolf and stag, the restless hunger and the rooted loyalty. "You're not meant to be me. You are meant to be Liara Baratheon Stark. The realm will need you in your own way. Change, but remember." Liara drew a breath, let it out slow. "Will you stay? Advise, even after?" "Nexi Hermesbide." "I'll always answer," Arya promised. "But you must decide for yourself. Trust your counsel. Trust Rickard. Trust what you know in your bones." They stood together, watching the sun break through the mist. Far below, small folk began their day. Apprentices fetching water, washerwomen singing as they wrung linens, the blacksmith's hammer ringing like a heartbeat. Arya listened, letting the sounds fill her. This was the north she had helped build, the family she would leave behind. The council continued its work through the waning weeks of autumn. Gendry oversaw the construction of new sea walls at White Harbor, a gift from the Stormlands to shield the port from the worst winter tempests. Rickard traveled to the Riverlands, negotiating new trade rights and settling an old feud between two rival houses with wit and a carefully placed cask of Arbor gold. Liara spent a week with the wildlings north of Last Hearth, learning their new ways of winter planting and hearing tales of how the snows had shifted in recent years. In the evenings, the family gathered in Arya's solar, the hearth blazing, dogs sleeping at their feet. They spoke of the day's trials, the old legends, the gossip from Bravos or Old Town, the hints of trouble brewing across the sea. Liara's laughter mixed with Gendry's low chuckle, Rickard's quick-witted retorts. It felt, in those moments, like nothing could ever break the peace they had made. But news arrived from the Vale. A long winter had ruined the lower passes. A flood had destroyed grain stores, and a band of outlaws was preying on caravans. Arya did not hesitate. She gathered her cloak, her boots, her dagger, needle now mostly ceremonial, but sharp as ever, and told Liara and Rickard to prepare for travel. Gendry would remain to oversee the autumn stores and the shipyard. They set out before sunrise, the Wolfstag banner flying behind them, a dozen loyal riders at their back. The journey was rough. Rain and sleet, roads muddied by the last storms. In the villages, hunger had returned, old fears stirring. Arya walked among the people, listening, trading stories, sharing food from her own packs. Liara brokered peace between two bands of mercenaries, buying their loyalty with honest pay and a promise of land come spring. Rickard tracked the outlaws, uncovering their camp in a narrow vale. When the leader, a one-eyed veteran from the old wars, demanded gold to stand down, Arya offered him exile, and Lyra offered his men a chance to join the road crews. Some refused and were sent to the wall. Most accepted. They stayed in the vale through the first frost, repairing bridges, sharing winter seeds, helping to rebuild the ruined storehouses. By the time they rode for home, the crisis had eased, and the lords of the Vale greeted Arya and her children as kin, not as conquerors. Winterfell welcomed them with warmth and feasting. Gendry met them in the yard, dusted with flour and soot, beaming at Lyara's tales and Rickard's dry humor. That night, the family ate together with the whole council. Lords and stewards, wildlings and southern traders, new apprentices and the children of the kitchen staff. Arya sat at the head, listening, her gaze taking in every face, every new line and old scar. She felt the pulse of the realm, stronger than ever. The snows fell early that year. The walls were thick with frost, the courtyards muffled in white. Arya rose often before dawn, walking the gods' wood paths, speaking to the old gods in a voice more thought than sound. She found herself thinking of her father, her mother, Sansa and Bran, all those whose hands had shaped the world she now passed on. There was sadness in the memory, but pride too. One evening, as the aurora rippled across the sky, Arya called Liara and Rickard to her solar. She placed in Lyara's hands the ledger she had carried since her first ride, pages filled with names, stories, maps, and lessons. She handed Rickard a blade, not the finest or the sharpest, but the one Gendry had forged on the night Rickard was born, its hilt inlaid with a bit of weirwood and a sliver of antler. "It's time," Arya said simply. "I will advise if you ask, but the next chapter belongs to you." Liara bowed her head, fierce and grateful, and Rickard embraced his mother, whispering thanks in a voice thick with emotion. Arya slept that night more deeply than she had in years, the comfort of release easing her bones. She dreamed of running through the woods, of wind in her hair, of laughter and long roads, and the taste of freedom. She dreamed of Gendry's hand in hers, of her children's voices calling across the years. In the days that followed, Lyra and Rickard led the council. Gendry served as advisor, his counsel as respected as any maesters. The realm ran smoother than ever, not without trouble, but without panic. When ships went missing, Lyra sent patrols. When crops failed in the Barrowlands, Rickard arranged grain shipments from the Reach. The people saw that the wolf stag was not a relic, but a living promise. One last time, as the snows thickened and the nights grew long, Arya and Gendry walked the godswood together, their steps slow, their hands clasped. The moon was full, the heart tree's red eyes glinting in the white hush. They spoke little, words unnecessary in the comfort of old love. When they stopped, Arya rested her head on Gendry's shoulder and listened to the wind. "I used to dream of going farther," Arya said. "To the edge of the world." Gendry squeezed her hand. "You did. You went farther than anyone." She smiled, closing her eyes. "It's enough. All of it. More than I ever dared." As they returned to the warmth of Winterfell, Arya felt at last the certainty she had always chased, that what they had made would last, as long as memory and story, as long as courage and kindness. The dynasty lived, not in names or banners, but in every life changed, every wrong righted, every time someone new was welcomed at the council table. Winter passed. Spring thawed the stones, rivers ran high, and green spread across the land. Arya watched from her window as Lyra led the banners south. Rickard set forth with traders east, and small folk planted new seeds in fields long fallow. One morning, as the dawn broke clear and bright, Arya sat by the open window, Gendry's hand in hers, the sounds of a world at peace drifting up from the yard below. She breathed deep, the air alive with hope, and knew her journey was truly finally home. Achaia. Spring arrived late, a shy guest coaxed forth by the slow retreat of frost. Crocus and snowdrop thrust through the slush in the Winterfell gardens. Lambs bawled in the thawed pastures, and the sound of running water was everywhere. A chorus of roofs, rills, and barrels brimming in the first true warmth since autumn. Arya greeted the season with a new ease in her stride. Her steps were measured now, less the bound of the restless girl she'd once been and more the purposeful tread of a matron who had outrun shadow and legend alike. The castle felt alive, each stone and lintel bearing some trace of her hand. Gendry's strength, Lyra's bold vision, Rickard's prudent hand. The dynasty was real now, as permanent as the bedrock of the north. Inside the solar, morning sun striped the old flagstones, gold dust dancing in the slanting light. Arya sat at her writing desk with Gendry beside her. The ledger open, not for ruling but for memory. A new habit, since Lyra and Rickard had claimed their full duties and the weight of the crown had become, at last, shared. She wrote slowly, the ink thick and dark, each word considered. Not just names, but lessons, the little wisdoms gathered over a lifetime of roads and reckonings. The pages traced the kingdom's growth. New settlements founded along the White Knife. Wildling villages established south of the Wall. Their people now farmers and hunters, their children learning letters beside the Norths. The sea walls at White Harbor had held through the worst winter storm in living memory. The new grain fleet from Old Town had fed the Barrowlands and the Marches. The council, once a handful of wary nobles, had grown into a tapestry. Fishermen from Sisterton, crofters from the Neck, hedge knights, wildlings, women who kept ledgers, men who sewed sails, all sitting together beneath the wolf-stag banner. Arya set her pen aside and leaned into Gendry's shoulder, listening to the quiet. Beyond the window, Rickard's voice echoed in the yard, instructing a group of stewards in the new language of trade, mixing the clipped vowels of the north with the stormy dialect of Shipbreaker Bay. Lyra laughed somewhere near the smithy, a clear sound that reminded Arya of wind over new grass. Gendry pressed a kiss to Arya's brow, and for a while they sat in peace. In time, a letter arrived, news from the Vale. The repairs to the flood-damaged passes were finished. The outlaws who had plagued the roads had been folded back into the towns, many finding honest work as guards and road wardens. Lyra's promises had held. Rickard's agreements, inked in neat script, were being honored without incident. Arya felt a quiet surge of pride, not for herself, but for her children and the way they'd made her lessons their own. Later that day, as the sun arced high, Arya and Gendry walked through the rebuilt Winterfell. The castle had grown under their rule. New towers rose beside the old kitchens, expanded to feed not just nobles, but the household in its hundreds. In the yard, Lyra sparred with a wildling woman, a blur of steel, laughter, and shouts from the watching crowd. Rickard sat with a scribe from Old Town, translating contracts and pausing every few lines to offer a joke or a question to a pair of eager apprentices. Arya found herself drawn to the Godswood, as she always was in times of change. She slipped through the familiar arches, boots silent on damp loam. The heart tree stood in full leaf, its face streaked crimson, its roots tangled with wild violets. She knelt in the moss, pressing her palm to the bark, whispering thanks for all that had been mended, all that had been kept. Gendry waited nearby, hands clasped before him, a silent watch, her constant since that first journey, when both had been so lost, so determined, so young. Lyra joined them as dusk painted the world in gold and blue. She'd traded her sparring leathers for a council cloak, hair wild and eyes bright, cheeks flushed from effort. She knelt beside Arya, not as heir, but as daughter. And the three sat in the hush, the old gods listening. "Mother," Lyra said, voice hushed but sure. "The council has chosen. The wildlings are to hold 2 seats, the marches will have 3, and the riverfolk will preside over the summer court. We'll start with White Harbor's moot in a fortnight." Arya smiled, pride and relief mingling. "You chose well." Lyra grinned, fierce and a little vulnerable. "I argued as you would, and I listened, as you taught me. But the rest? I think it was just living, being there. That's all ruling ever is," Arya replied. "Being present. Hearing every voice." Gendry placed his hand on Lyra's shoulder. "And never turning away from hard work," he said, smiling. Rickard arrived soon after, his own cloak trailing quills and parchment, hair disheveled, hands stained with ink. He bowed, always a touch formal, always half joking, and presented the latest trade tallies. A tidy sheet that promised enough grain to feed the north and surplus for the southern ports. Arya took it, scanned it, and nodded. "You're both ready," she said. "And the council is strong. There will be storms, but the walls are high. The people trust you, and that is worth more than any crown." As twilight deepened, the family rose and walked together back to the castle. The halls were bright, voices drifting from every chamber, smells of stewing meat and baking bread mingling with the sharper tang of the smithy's fires. Everywhere, Arya saw the living legacy of her years. Women in council, wildlings drilling on the practice field, children learning their letters beneath the carved beams of the solar. She saw the promise of the new dynasty made real, not in gold or titles, but in the daily labor and the courage of ordinary people. The next weeks were a blur of motion. Lyra rode to White Harbor, leading the spring moot, her standard joined by banners from across the realm. Rickard journeyed east, negotiating salt rights at Sisterton, then south to confer with the Manderless about rebuilding a storm-damaged dock. Gendry remained at Winterfell, working with the smiths on a new canal lock to speed grain shipments down the White Knife. Arya visited the villages north of the wall. Her presence both reassurance and reminder. The wolf's eyes see far, and mercy walks the land as surely as justice. News came from the south, peace in the Reach, the pirates driven from Shipbreaker Bay, the Riverlands enjoying their most prosperous planting in a generation. Arya received letters from Brienne's granddaughter in Tarth, from the maesters at Old Town, from distant Bravos and List. All spoke of the stability and opportunity brought by the Wolfstag dynasty. Trouble, when it came, was not war but the slow grinding sort, disputes over taxes, a poor harvest in the Barrowlands, a brief outbreak of flux in the wildling villages. Arya counseled patience, Lyra led relief efforts, Rickard reorganized the supply lines, and Gendry smiths made new tools for the farmers. None of these problems made psalms, but each was met and managed, and with every small success, the bond of trust deepened. Late that summer, the realm gathered for a festival in the fields outside Winterfell, a celebration of 25 years of peace and unity. People came from every corner, fishermen from the Three Sisters, marsh riders from the Neck, miners from the Stormlands, wildlings, crofters, apprentices, stewards. Tents sprawled for leagues, fires burned, music and laughter filled the night. Arya and Gendry presided with Lyra and Rickard, not as monarchs above, but as first among equals. There were games and contests, feasts and dances. Children chased each other under banners, old friends met and made new pacts, and in every moment there was the sense of something earned, something precious, a peace woven by effort, mended by compromise, sealed by the enduring presence of those who remembered harder days. On the last night of the festival, Arya wandered alone into the fields, the stars wheeling overhead, the air sweet with hay and distant fire. She looked back at the glow of Winterfell, at the great tents and banners, at the people whose voices had become the heart of the realm. She felt the quiet satisfaction of a task fulfilled, a journey completed, not with one grand victory, but with 1,000 small kindnesses, and the willingness to begin again after each stumble. When she returned to the camp, she found Gendry waiting for her. They walked together through the quiet, the hush of the north all around them. "We did it," he said, his voice low, awe in the words. "It lasted." Arya nodded, resting her head against his arm. Not by sword. Not really. By listening. By working. By not giving up when it was easier to let the old feuds burn. Never. Gendry smiled, pride and love shining in his gaze. By being together. The last leaves fell as autumn waned, and winter threatened the edges of the world. But the fires of the Wolfstag dynasty burned bright within every home, every hall, every heart. As Arya and Gendry watched Lyra and Rickard lead the council, saw the next generation gather to shape the realm, they knew the peace they had made would endure, not as a brittle silence, but as a living promise. And so the Baratheon, Stark dynasty endured, not in tales of conquest, but in the daily labor of those who built and rebuilt, who remembered old wounds and healed them, who welcomed change and honored tradition, who loved fiercely and without regret. The wolf and the stag ran together still, free and wild, wise and strong, carrying the hopes of a realm remade, generation by generation, as long as courage and kindness endured.